Great. Welcome to this UUCA Adult Religious Education class. And this evening is a really exciting combination of two organizations that are very synergistic in our values and principles, Citizen Advocacy and UUCA. This evening we have three presenters, Katie, Marnie, and Aaron, and they each have worn lots of hats in their professional and personal lives. Just very brief bit about each of them from their long bios. Katie Chandler is a licensed clinical social worker. Marnie Crowley is a former state citizen advocacy coordinator with the Georgia Advocacy Office. And Aaron Litchkay is the director and lead coordinator of Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb. So Citizen Advocacy, our local chapter, has given us this special gift. They have sponsored for us this 3-part series, and they have taken a famous 5-day training program that happens across the nation, and it's a full 5 days, and Katie and Marnie have paired up many times to do this 5-day training, and they've accomplished the incredible feat of taking 5 days and cramming it into a 3-evening teaser. So this is our first evening of 3 parts, and we're delighted to be getting this taste of their 5-day training. The full training is called SRV, which stands for Social Role Valorization. So a huge thank you to Citizen Advocacy for sponsoring this opportunity. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Katie, Marnie, and Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Am I confused? Were we not going to do the chalice lighting and all that?
When is
that?
Oh
my gosh.
I
was so excited. This is called my eagerness, and I was so excited to just turn the mic over because they're counting the minutes. So thank you for that reminder. They even kindly provided a reading for me. So thanks. I'll go backwards on my list here. Okay, I have the chalice, and I have a reading from Margaret Weekly. Let me make sure I can see it. Okay. Beautiful. Our chalice lighting this evening is called What I Believe by Margaret Wheatley. What I believe. People are the solution to the problems that confront us. Technology is not the solution, although it can help. We are the solution. We as generous, open-hearted people who want to use our creativity and caring on behalf of other human beings and all life. Relationships are all there is. Everything in the universe only exists because it is in relationship to everything else. Nothing exists in isolation. We have to stop pretending we are individuals who can go it alone. We humans want to be together. We only isolate ourselves when we are hurt by others, but alone is not our natural state. Today, we live in an unnatural state, separating ourselves rather than being together. We become hopeful when somebody tells the truth. I don't know why this is, but I experience it often. Truly connecting with another human gives us joy. The circumstances that create this connection don't matter. Even those who work side by side in the worst natural disaster or crisis recall that experience as memorable. They are surprised to feel joy in the midst of tragedy, but they always do. We have to slow down. Nothing will change for the better until we do. We need time to think, to learn, to get to know each other. We are losing these great human capacities in the speed up of modern life, and it is killing us. The cure for despair is not hope. It is discovering what we want to do about something we care about. Oh, geez, are there any other major steps I've forgotten before we begin? Marvelous. Okay, my second attempt. Marnie, Katie, and Erin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was beautiful. And Erin, thanks for finding that. So welcome, everyone. I'm Katie. I'm glad to be here. And I do have some slides to share. And I'll let Marnie introduce herself, and then we'll hear from Erin, too.
Perfect. I'm Marnie Crowley. Like they said, just briefly, I'm coming to you guys from Lizella, Georgia, which is a suburb of Macon, we'll call it. And I used to be the statewide citizen advocacy coordinator. Now I'm a stay-at-home mom. That's my full-time job, and I teach classes from time to time around the state with Katie. So thank you guys for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. So, Erin, before we let you or ask you to talk a little bit about citizen advocacy and how this came to be, I'll let everyone know that I live closer than Marnie to you guys, probably. I'm just out in Swanee and work right now with, I have a number of grants with a small nonprofit to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities around the state in their self-advocacy efforts, and to make sure that the voices of people are heard, often at the tables where voices are missing. So that's some of the work that I'm doing now. And like Marnie said, we've been working together probably, I don't know, well, probably 13 or 14 years, and have worked closely with Erin and Dorona and Paula, who are all here from different roles within citizen advocacy. So Erin, if you'll tell folks what that is, that would be really great.
Yes, of course. Well, first off, I wanted to welcome everybody. This has being here tonight and getting started has been something that we've been wanting and discussing and figuring out the best way that we could bring all you wonderful people from UUCA together to hear more about what citizen advocacy is, and kind of to expand on the rich, long, and deep history of connections that citizen advocacy and UUCA have had from different board members and different people in your congregation. But more specifically, I know Bo is on this program tonight, and thanks to his wonderful efforts bringing us together, he's really been that link who has been really pushing to bring that here, because he always remembers every time he hears the main tenets of UUCA, and then he has been with CISI so long. He's like, they just match so well. So we're so happy to have you all here, and really happy to have Katie to lead us through this social role valorization journey that we'll go through over the next 3 weeks. But first off, so I'm Erin Litchke. I am the Director of Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb. So around the state, as you could tell from Molly, she was once the statewide coordinator. There are different offices around the state, including in Savannah, Macon, Athens, Milledgeville, and so on. But we here at Citizen Advocacy of Atlanta and DeKalb have been doing our work for over 40 years. So since the late 70s, Citizen Advocacy has been working in Atlanta and DeKalb County. And for all of that time, Citizen Advocacy continues to do the same thing that we started from day one. And what we do is we help to bring together two people into a relationship. And it's a very specific and powerful relationship that we work and hope to have the hopes that last over the long haul. So in general, citizen advocacy works to help provide protection and advocacy for somebody with a developmental disability who may be vulnerable or at risk of disability discrimination, such as abuse or neglect or extreme social isolation. And we help provide this protection advocacy by bringing people together. It's all through the power of human beings getting to know one another, loving each other, and finding a way to go through life and provide and stand and roll beside each other. So in our work, we search out people that have some vulnerabilities or risks, people that might be spending their entire days in segregated and congregated places and day programs where they don't have the opportunity to be on ARE classes like this at night, or be able to go out into their local community and find new friends and people to build their core support. And we get to know them and who they are, what their gifts are, what their desires, their dreams, who they want to be. And once we get to know them and know their story, what we do is we go and share that story with people that we know and trust around our local community, around Atlanta and DeKalb County, searching for one person that would answer the call to say, yes, I would like to meet and be that person's citizen advocate. And from there, we introduce the two people together to start the journey of a relationship. And that relationship is built on some mutual likes, some different skill sets, but overall, those two people enter into an independent relationship between each other. And that relationship grows depending on how they want. And citizen advocacy is there in the background to support that relationship and the citizen advocate for whenever things come up in life, when those hard struggles happen, when there's conflict in the relationship, to make sure that those two people have the best chance to be in a long-term relationship that will provide that protection and advocacy for the person with the developmental disability. And these relationships look different as they are, as each person's different. And they lead from just, helping combat that social isolation where people feel lonely, to making sure kids are getting the proper education they deserve, or someone advocating for their rights when they're in the hospital, when they're sick, or to make sure that they have a good place to live and aren't in danger of any harm from any providers of health or anything like that. So citizen advocacy ranges a long time, and we're very happy to have this conversation tonight, because what we do is based on these principles and these ideas and these learnings centered around social role valorization, and the belief that every person has unique gifts and talents that the community and everybody, that they should have the opportunity to share with everybody, and have those valued roles that we all have and will continue to embrace and make our wider community here in Atlanta and DeKalb County an even better and more inclusive place. That's citizen advocacy.
Thanks, Aaron. And later in the series, we're asking Aaron to share some stories from some citizen advocacy matches and some cool things that have been happening when a person is matched with someone and the two of them start to care about each other and look out for each other. So that'll be coming up too. So thank you, Aaron. And then as Marnie and I get started, this is kind of why we're here. We're glad you're here, and thanks for joining us on this 3-week series. It will be most relevant and most potent if you are able to attend all 3 weeks in a row, because as Elizabeth said, we've really picked from several days of material and stories and lots of information, some things that we can get through in probably 4.5 hours over 3 weeks. So we hope that you will come back and attend all 3 weeks. But what we're going to be talking about over this series, we're going to be talking about social devaluation and explaining how people get devalued and the consequences or the wounding life experiences that happen once people are seen as being devalued, not as valued, not as worthy in society. And we'll talk about the risk and how people are living in heightened vulnerability. We'll also talk about the overall impact to people who are marginalized. And as you've heard, this framework comes from social role valorization and is how citizen advocacy moves and breathes in the world as well from these principles. And they're also applicable to any marginalized group. And so I think you'll start to see how this could be relevant to any marginalized group, not just folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, even though that's going to be a lot of the examples, or many of the examples that we use, because that's been our experience and that's how Citizen Advocacy does their work. So towards the last session, so you really have to come back for week 3, otherwise you won't hear about the remedies and like what's possible and what can be done. So today and next week, we're going to get really into the stuff that's not so great, and really stepping into the shoes of the people that we're thinking about, people that we care about who have been excluded and left out and isolated, and we'll go through those wounds that happen to folks. And so week 3, when we start to give you some of the possibilities and the stories where Citizen Advocacy has made a difference, and where all of the things that we do that we might not yet be conscious of impact people, and how we can go about that differently. So that's just kind of a quick overview of this series that we've put together. And in the introduction, we had a reference to a ladder that Marnie's going to talk about.
Thanks, Katie. So, I mean, and I don't think that this is uncommon for people to think about this, that we know that in society, we organize people into groups, and that there are people that are at the bottom of the ladder, and they're the worst off among our societies, and there are people that are at the top of the ladder. It's important to remember that every society does not value the same things. So the people that are at the top and the bottom may not be the same in every single society. So we're talking mostly here about Western cultures, and our status and value often determines where we are on the ladder. And it is possible to move up and down the ladder. We're not and that's one of the things that we like to talk about from a citizen advocacy framework, and from a roles framework, is how people are able to move up and down the ladder.
So what we want to start with, let's see, I'm going to switch screens here. Yes.
One other thing we forgot to say, Elizabeth told us we were supposed to say this and then we forgot. So
we got
we are open to questions. You guys can put stuff in the chat box if you want to. It's going to be monitored. Aaron's actually monitoring that for us. Or if you just want to come off mute and say, hey, we've got a question here, and we'll try it that way first. And as long as we can kind of keep moving, we'll do that. Otherwise, we may have to hold questions till the end. But if you have something that's burning for you, please just let us know.
Yes, thank you. So I've pulled up a different view of this, because now we actually do want to hear from you. And just in general, we want to do some brainstorming, some calling out things that make up the good things in your life. What are the things that all people need? What are the things that, make a good life? Like, what are the things that bring you joy? And so this is where you tell us, and I'm going to make a list.
Doing things you love to do.
Y'all are going to forgive my typos, and I will correct them as I see them. Typically, so when we're in person, this is what happens in Zoom land, but typically when we're in person, we would have wallpaper on the wall and markers, and we would be writing and calling out things to get written down. So this is a different version of that. So thanks for supporting this technology. I see Claire wrote about pets that are part of what makes the good life for her. What else? So I have these coming in from the chat box. We're hearing about family and grandchildren, traveling, having close friends and having friends, books, satisfying work, community, and probably being a part of community, probably really belonging to community. I might add Yes. So we have money, we have love, and probably relationships. We've talked about family and friends as well.
A safe home.
Yes. Yes. And I see Dorona wrote security. Education. Good health. Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe spirituality, or add theater and other arts. So Barbara says having my own outdoor space. I like that. And probably it's just for folks in general, it's probably having your own space too. Like maybe for you, it's outdoors, and for someone else, it might be a different kind of space. But yes, and then freedom and autonomy. Fix that. What else makes a good life that we don't have already?
Also noting that Margaret put in clean air and water.
Thank you. I missed that. Thanks. Laura, thank you. Flexibility.
And somebody put books, but I think that some of that is, lots of interests and activities and those sorts of things,
Yes, so like recreation and adventure, or things that folks do that bring you joy. What about being valued for your contributions? I know we mentioned, I don't see it right now. Satisfying work was already mentioned, but maybe also being valued for your contributions and who you are.
I think somebody put in the chat too about good governance.
Okay, thank you.
See that? Yeah. And being treated fairly by the government.
Yes. So access to healthy food, access to public libraries, access to the things that we all use in our communities that, support us and also help us to be better citizens. And then intimacy and connection also listed. And then I'm not sure if folks are still typing, or I'm going to show you. I'm going to have to switch screens now and go back to the one where I can't type in directly. So play. Okay, so you still see the whole list. And then this slide comes from a friend and colleague, Brittany Curry, who has a business now called Inky Brittany, where she is a graphic facilitator and graphic artist, and she has her roots in citizen advocacy as well. She was the director of the citizen advocacy office in Milledgeville, and now I think she's still on the board in Savannah. Is that true? And so anyway, this is one of her skillful illustrations where she's describing the good life. And so some of the things she has listed here, she has a good job, feeling secure, being part of a family and community, having a nice place to live, having self-worth, participating and contributing and being valued for those, serving others as part of the good life as described, as well as money and possessions, and certainly friendships and relationships. So I think your list certainly is depicted in this illustration, and this is what we would probably consider and agree make up the things in life that we want, the things in life that make us feel comfortable and bring us joy and make up a good life. And so we wanted to start with this so that we can have this and hold this in our minds as we move into some of the things that are hard and some of the things that people who get left out of this, people who get excluded, people who are seen as different and then because of that treated differently, treated poorly, don't have access to all of the things that we've just listed as being a part of a good life. And so we're going to talk about how that happens.
I was going to mention too, Katie, that if you flip back up to that other slide, if you can do that for me. Citizen advocacy, this is the beauty of citizen advocacy, is that citizen advocacy actually addresses through all of the ways advocates move in the world, all of these aspects of the good life. So, obviously friendships and relationships, those are easy ones. You can see that, in citizen advocacy, but even when you look at things like money and possessions. So I've seen advocates that are representative payees where they're actually handling other people's money, or as people are being moved around, they actually protect people's possessions, because when people get moved a lot, they tend to lose stuff with every move. So being a part of community, feeling security, advocates help people find jobs. Advocates help people find nice places to live. Citizen advocacy includes people with all that are devalued in all kinds of ways in their higher order thinking on their board of directors. So citizen advocacy is a direct response to helping people access the good things in life. So I just wanted to kind of make that point together. I also think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Wolfensberger. So Wolfensberger is, he and John O'Brien really created citizen advocacy. And he is the father of social role valorization as well. So if you have a little extra time, you can do a little bit of reading about Dr. Wolfensberger. He has passed away. He was at Syracuse University for years and years, but we'd be remiss not to mention him because it is his work that we've based all of this work on. All right. So moving on, we've used this word several times, and we've talked about devaluation. So what we really want to do is go ahead and define this. The attribution of low or even no value. So this is when one group of person or group of people attribute low or even no value to another group or person based on a characteristic, some characteristic that people perceive as being negative, okay? So a group of people or a person looks at another group and says, I see a difference there and I don't like that difference and I'm gonna perceive that as being negative. So that becomes a devalued status. So that is what we mean by devaluation. Is that clear for people? All righty. So it's important to remember that devaluation is not the same as being rude or impolite or discourteous. Those things are things that are just being rude. Devaluation is actually a social dilemma. It is our society. It is not, just based on individuals acting upon another individual. This is systemic and societal. Okay, It's also not the same as just disliking a person or the same as making demands on a person. So it is important to remember that we're talking about a societal issue here, not so much an individual issue, although you can devalue people individually as well.
Yes, that's a good point. And so this slide is one that you will see us work through over the 3 weeks. We're only going to get to the first arrow tonight. And so this is really the slide that we'll come back to. It's what happens to people who are devalued. And so we're going to start talking about how people who are perceived and identified with certain qualities and certain characteristics, we're going to make another list in a moment, how they become devalued. And then next week we'll talk more about the wound of profound rejection, and we'll talk about how that's different than how you and I may have experienced some rejection in our lives, because everyone has a touchstone for being rejected, but we're talking about profound rejection that's relentless and likely lifelong for people who are on the outsides of, or who are outcast and excluded. And then we'll talk about another consequence or another wound that happens, is that people get cast into negative roles or devalued roles, and you'll recognize these because they show up a lot of the times as stereotypes that folks in society make about people with disabilities or people who are seen as other. And so you'll recognize some of the roles we're talking about next week as stereotypes and negative assumptions that get made about people, who people are and what people can do and can't do. Another thing that happens is that people get distanced from everyday, ordinary, typical people, distance from people of valued status. And Aaron made reference to this in the beginning when he was talking about how citizen advocacy does the work of finding people who are excluded, who might spend their entire times in, or their entire days in day programs only with other people with disabilities. And so they don't have access to the ordinary, typical things that bring about the good life that we just made a list about. And people get denied opportunities and access. And then eventually, people are, often subject to discrimination. We will talk a little bit about the evidence where, especially in segregated and congregated settings, there is more social and physical and psychological abuse. There's a lot of harm that happens, as well as violence, and eventually what Dr. Wolfensberger has coined death making, and that's the hastening of someone's life, and how people with disabilities have their lives hastened fairly often. So we'll go through all of that. That's a very quick recap, and what we're going to focus on now is this first point here. And to get to what it is that society devalues, specifically in our society, and we're going to be thinking about not your personal value system, but in general, we're going to look first at what we value as a society as a whole. What's typically something that our society, holds high regard for, what we value, not necessarily your personal ones. So what we're going to get to the opposite after we discuss what's highly valued in our society. So this is another list, and I don't have to write all this one down because you're going to call out some things at the top of your head. What's valued in our society? If I had the button where I could unmute everyone all at the same time, I would do it right now. Yes, okay. Wow, look, okay, chat box, sorry, I have a second screen over here, a second monitor. So beauty, yes, absolutely. We have a slide just for that, because check this out. Our society as a whole places a lot of value, right, on beauty of body, health in general. And it's not to say that being healthy isn't a valuable thing, but that there's so much emphasis placed, right? And so you probably, even just seeing what wow, y'all are fast. Barbara wrote down when she wrote beauty, like you probably had an instant image in your mind about what society values as a beautiful body. Is that true? I see some heads nodding, thanks. So this is one example. So work, I would find work here with productivity and achievement as well, because we do value work, and we value being productive at work and achieving and constantly, advancing and climbing the ladders of, corporate success, and doing more and more and more. And, when people ask you, just people that you know or casual acquaintances with, like, how have you been? And folks say busy. Like there's a mutual nod, like, oh yeah, everyone's busy. Like that's something that is highly valued in our society. All right, what was next? Money. So wealth and material goods. Yes, I don't probably have to talk very much about this at all, except some of these images here. I just find it fascinating that the American home size has increased 60%, and the rate of self-storage, like all the storage units, aren't they everywhere? Like on all like the little intersections, like you can see, like store your stuff, because we have so much stuff and we accumulate so much stuff that we're paying to store it, right? And then another fact is that Americans spend more than $375 billion on apparel each year. So good looks and fitness, I think that goes with the slide I had up, and athletic prowess with the fit people, the healthy people, the beautiful bodies, the strong bodies. Also on every corner of every intersection, I bet there is some sort of smoothie shop or healthy protein shake shop, or like a fitness all those little gyms in a boxes and big gyms and all of that. Like it's so available, it's highly valued in our society. And I bet there's research on how many people spend money on gym memberships and don't even go, right? Like, because we value it, that we are going to go to the gym. So good looks and fitness also might have to do some with this slide here about how we value youth maybe and newness. So two separate things, but youth, and it's not that there's an issue with valuing young people, but it's when one age is valued over any other age. So the idea that we are paying lots of money for products to make us look younger, to remove the wrinkles or the whatever features on your face that you want to remove to make you look younger, like the lines and dark circles and that sort of thing for women. That's common. Hair, like to make you look younger, like you haven't lost your hair. These kinds of examples, as well as the idea of newness. And I am guilty of this in my own personal values, even though these are all society values. Is like the new iPhone just came out and I kind of want it, like, and I don't need it. Like my phone is fine. And but they're like, the companies know this, and they have these like trade-in programs or buyback programs where you can send your perfectly working phone in and get a new one, because there's so much emphasis and value placed on new things, having new things, right? Okay, what have I missed while I've been talking? Titles and accomplishment. Yes, I like how that is phrased, and it goes with productivity and achievement, and it probably also might go here with competence and intelligence. And then we'll talk a little bit about independence as being one of the values that our society holds. So the idea that people who are seen as more competent or more highly valued, they have more status, so that speaks to the titles, as well as the intelligence. So people who would graduate from Ivy League schools are seen as more valuable than people who may not go to college or who may go into trade work. And this is, again, not personal values, but society in general. This is something that's been deeply held for a really long time, right? As well as accomplishments here. And then the idea of independence is highly valued in our society, to the point, since you're all on mute, this might not work as well, but have you heard like folks talking about, if I ever need support, or if I ever like get sick or am not able to care for myself, like, and be independent, like I would rather, you're nodding, so I'm guessing you know what I'm gonna say, but I would rather not be living, I would rather be dead than have to rely on other people taking care of me. Like that's been, a fairly common phrase in our society, and the idea that we so deeply value being independent, which is kind of not even true, because we're all codependent, right? And we need each other. It's part of the relationship. And but the idea that we're independent, like you can see all of these like little, if you just Google image independence, there's so many sayings about it. So novelty, yes, like youth, newness with novelty. What else? Have I missed things? Let's see. how about valuing pleasure and happiness as a way of life? So this idea that we should have a cush, convenient, kind of easy life, like that's valued. And people often want to avoid some of the things that are hard. People want to overlook, not talk about, ignore the hardships and the trials, and have a cush life, a happy life. Actually, I'm going to go to the next slide and I'll come back to this convenient one. But the next one is more about happiness. And look at this, all of these, how to live a happy, pleasurable life. And this just came from a quick Google image search, like all of these little images instantly, because society values being happy and, having a happy life. Like how many, what are they, self-help books about, like there's the whole industry of self-help literature to teach you how to be a better person, how to have the happy life, how to have it all, right? So that's highly valued in our society. And then I'm going back to the convenience part. And these are just examples of all of the things that are at our fingertips now, because it's what we value. It's what really many of us who do live with valued status have come accustomed to, being able to, have something delivered to your house, not even in 2 days with Amazon Prime, but if you're in the city, like many folks probably on this call, even more instant than that, right? Like by the even, in the next couple hours, probably by the time we get off of this Zoom. So the idea of having this convenience, this pleasure, ease of life that we feel entitled to. And then, so raising children in marriage, I think that would be something that our society highly values, and probably specifically for folks that follow Judeo-Christian teachings or norms there. And so in society, people who don't would be devalued by association. That's what we're going to get to next. But Marnie, did I miss any? I think we got them all. Even on mute.
That was good work, guys.
Ooh, wait, one more. How about this one?
Oh yeah, we didn't.
What do you think? So the idea of having unrestrained choice, we talked about how part of the good life is having autonomy, which is true. But this idea that it's so valued, and that we want our choice, how we want it, when we want it, and sometimes like without any regard for anyone else, right? That people are going to go after their own individualism over the greater good. Okay, so that is kind of the list we came up with. I think we predicted that pretty well, Marnie.
That was good. You guys did great.
Oh, guys, I know.
That was perfect. All right, so if this is the list of what we value, then the opposite of that becomes the things that we devalue, okay? So if we devalue material good, if we value wealth, material goods, we devalue poverty and a lack of goods, okay? We value health and beauty of body, sickness, and bodies that don't conform to our norm of what a body should look like become devalued. Youth and newness, old, things that are old, outdated, all of that becomes devalued. All right, so if we value competence and independence and intelligence, we devalue being dependent and incompetent, okay? Productivity and achievement, anything that's wasteful or unproductive becomes devalued. So this idea of unrestrained choice and adult individualism, that becomes anything that's a lack of choice or anything that gets in the way of your choices becomes devalued. And pleasure and happiness is a way of life. Devalue anything, life that's painful in life, any hardships, any trials, any tribulations. Okay, so in and of itself, the fact that society values things and devalues things isn't that big of a deal, right? I mean, everybody says all societies have things that we value and devalue. Well, the problem comes in when the people are perceived and identified that we actually attribute those values to people, and then they become devalued themselves. Okay, so it's not just that we devalue poverty, we then devalue people who are poor. Okay, so it's not just that we devalue people who aren't independent, people that are dependent, we then devalue the people who are dependent. And that is how we have set up this ladder, right? Is the people on top have the qualities that we value the most, and the people on the bottom have qualities that are devalued. Does that make sense for people? So that actually becomes one of the first wounds that we talk about that happens to people who are devalued, is that the people actually become perceived and identified with these qualities, and they become devalued themselves. Where are we here? Sorry, I've mentioned that my printer wasn't working, and so now I'm having to use my phone. All right, so how is it that a person becomes devalued? Okay, they become devalued by being different from others. Okay, so that's the first thing, is that we have this vision in our head of what our societal norm is, and we can point out a difference. And that difference can be just one thing, or it could be in a lot of dimensions. Okay, so we're going to talk about degrees of devaluation as well, but it could be one or more than one thing. And key here is that these differences have got to be perceived as being significant by the majority of the ruling segment of society. So if you have differences that aren't seen as being significant, then it doesn't really matter. Katie and I are wearing glasses. There's several people in here that are wearing glasses. That is difference, but you know, people don't look at people with glasses and go, "Oh, you're so different. We're going to devalue you for that." Okay, so it's important that what we are perceiving is significant by the ruling, you know, the people who have got the power within society. And lastly, they need to value this difference negatively. Okay, so let's think about this for a second, because let's think about an Olympic athlete, right? Olympic athletes, they're different from others, oftentimes in many dimensions. It's pretty significant. I mean, we just got done with the Olympics. We've seen, you know, all of the Olympic athletes that are traveling all over and on the Wheaties box. But that difference is actually seen as being positive, right? So that is the other flip point, is that the difference has got to be valued negatively. And that is what causes people to be moved down the rungs. That is what we mean by devaluation. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the degrees of devaluation. So if we think about people on the ladder again, right? We all know that there's people who are at the top of the ladder, and then there's people who are in the middle of the ladder, and then there's people that are on the bottom of the ladder, maybe even not even on the ladder. They're hanging on by their pinky fingers to the bottom rung, right? So we understand this idea of degrees of devaluation. So this image here is a similar image to the ladder, but this one's actually, you can think of it as being like a merry-go-round. And I don't know if you guys remember when you were kids riding on the merry-go-round. If you were standing in the very center of the merry-go-round, and no matter how fast that merry-go-round was spinning, you were going to be in the center. Didn't take much. But as you kind of started moving out, as it was spinning, it was going faster and faster and faster and faster. It becomes harder and harder to hold on. And it also becomes harder and harder to move back to the center. Okay, so when we're talking about degrees of devaluation, we're talking about the people who are on the edge that are holding on. That merry-go-round is going so fast. Those people are the most profoundly devalued, right? And as you move closer to that center, where you're standing comfortably as it's spinning really quickly, you're at the valued core. Does that make sense for people? Okay, so how does that actually happen? So the first thing is, how do you get moved further out? Is how much are you actually going against what society's norm is? Okay, So for example, someone who has a slight limp is likely to be a lot less devalued than someone who has a very significant disability and needs to use a wheelchair to get around. Okay, so that's the kind of the core. You can look at this from a mental health side. Somebody who has mild depression is likely to be a lot less devalued than someone who has very significant persistent mental health issue like schizophrenia. Okay, so how far are you from the edge, or how far are you from the norm will play into it. The second piece is how many values. So how many of these devaluing conditions do you have? And what we find oftentimes is that the people that are most profoundly devalued, they embody a lot of these devaluing conditions. They oftentimes are poor. They oftentimes don't have good jobs. They're oftentimes uneducated. So as you pile on more and more layers and more bricks that you're carrying, you get moved to that outer edge, and it becomes harder and harder to move back in, right? And then the other important part about it is how precious, how much do we hold this value? So how important is it to us? So the combination of those three things, when you look at it, you can ask yourself those questions. You can think about, well, how far are they going from the norm? How precious is it? How important is it to us? And how many devalued conditions do people have? And you can oftentimes think about that and set people on this curve, right? And look at them and think about the rings. And as you move out, we talk about this as being heightened vulnerability, that word, because as you move out and the merry-go-round is spinning very quickly, it's very difficult to hold on. So something that might be really just an inconvenience for a person who's at the center and the valued core becomes a major obstacle for somebody who's on the outside, right? We all live, in the South where, a snowstorm comes. We all know how this is in Atlanta. For us, it's kind of like, oh, wow, we got a snow day. But for someone who has to use public transportation and needs to get to dialysis in order to live, that becomes a major obstacle that could be a difference between life and death. So it's important to remember that we're talking about people, the more devalued you are, the more heightened your vulnerability is for bad things to happen. And when they happen, they're likely going to happen to people who are devalued first, and they're going to have the effects of that most severely. Okay, does that make sense for people?
Right, it's like the folks who get left behind during natural disasters.
Exactly. All right. So we know, I think, what ends up happening here is that people end up getting relegated to low social status, right? They are referred, oftentimes by sociologists as being deviant or having some deviancies. And so that's a part of all of this. And what ends up happening then oftentimes is that people get grouped into groups of people that automatically become devalued, and they get identified as that. And we all know this, okay? So what I would like for you guys to do is to think about, and we're going to do another little exercise here, is to think about who are the people and the groups of people who are devalued in our society.
Service workers and minimum wage job earners.
Absolutely.
Yes. And it's likely, I'm going to switch screens, that the reason that they're devalued is because they've service workers, if they're working, I was thinking support professionals to support people like folks who work in nursing facilities or folks who work with people with developmental disabilities are also likely devalued because of the population that they're supporting, right? They're underpaid. It's not, that kind of thing. So let me grab this screen back and I can write that down. Yes, Paula wrote that well. I might have missed a couple earlier. So people whose job it is to serve others' needs. Yes. Thank you for phrasing that.
You have Katie in the chat. You had people who are poor. And elderly, people who are elderly. Immigrants.
Yeah, uneducated earlier in the chat.
So people on walkers, probably people who use walkers and any sort of mobility device, like anything, wheelchair. Going off the screen here. People who are homeless. What did Aaron say? Sorry, I was in the chat and zoned in on typing everything up. Tell me again.
It was uneducated.
Thank you.
Of people who are sick.
Probably people who don't work.
Yes, unemployed. People who have addiction issues.
Okay, have I missed any? I guess everyone can see the screen because I'm not voicing all of these. Is that true? That everybody, we can go through them. People who are perceived as unsophisticated and naive. You know what? This might work too. Let's see if I can just copy. People who can't use technology. Okay. This list is quite similar to the opposite of what we just talked about with what's valued in society, right? That's what we were hoping for. This is a sophisticated class. Any others I'm missing?
We did pretty well. So when we look at these groups of people and individuals and groups of people, what ends up happening for a lot of people is that their life then becomes defined by whatever this devalued characteristic is. So when we start talking about these qualities, you all of a sudden your entire life becomes defined by the thing that people see as negative. And that changes the entire trajectory of your life. You get spun out to the edges, margins of society, and then your life is defined by that. And people have all kinds of ideas once you've get defined by that about what should happen to you, how it should happen, and all of a sudden your life all of a sudden is out of your control. Does that make sense for people? I also think this is really interesting. So the what do you guys call them? Principles, the UU principles. So the anti-racist, anti-oppression, multiculturalism. You guys are thinking about, I think, the church is thinking about all of these groups of people who are highly devalued and ways that you can address thinking about groups of people who are devalued. So I would actually, like you guys to actually spend some time thinking about, when you look at this list, what does your guys' congregation look like? Because oftentimes you can see about where you're not being as inclusive as you think you are based on who's not at the table. So this is a good exercise, is to kind of look and see, okay, so we've come up with the groups that are most highly devalued probably within our society, and it becomes who's not here and how can we include them. And that's where I think citizen advocacy, even though citizen advocacy, it speaks directly to people with disabilities, the idea of engagement, citizen engagement, is really critical, because there are all these groups of people who we know are highly devalued. So what are we doing as human beings, as people who are sitting here listening to this in our lives to make a difference for the people who are living in these devalued statuses? And
so social role valorization, one of the themes in it is around unconsciousness, and calling into your consciousness, like making you aware, being more aware. And it's something that takes a lot of practice. about, and it's not something that people do intentionally by leaving folks out or by excluding people. But what we often talk about within SRV and likely within citizen advocacy too is that it's the impact to the people. So it's the impact to the groups here, the people here who are represented, the people who are devalued and the groups of people who are devalued. It's the impact to them. It's not the intent of the folks who are doing the devaluing, or the folks who are observing, the folks who are leaving out, the folks who are avoiding, ignoring, not including, any of that. But it's the impact to the people. And so SRV is very intentional, and citizen advocacy is very intentional about the matches that are made, the relationships that are brought together because of the vulnerabilities, the heightened vulnerability that a person with a developmental disability lives with in your community, who likely has spent a lifetime of, and we're going to go through these consequences, these wounds next week, a lifetime of being rejected and not having access to ordinary, typical, everyday opportunities, like their sibling or their neighbor who's been had discriminated against, all the abuse. So it's that one person, the intentionality there. And so when Marnie was asking you to think about the congregation and who might be missing, just to raise your consciousness about that, and then what can intentionally be done as a remedy.
So we're going to give you guys a chance, actually. So we have a learning opportunity for you all.
Extended study.
An extended study. So between this time now and this time next week, we're going to give you guys a link to a Google Drive, and you're actually going to hear my voice speak to you. I think it's about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes, where I'm going to give you guys some prompts. And when we think about devaluation, none of us are above this. I hear people say all the time, "Oh, well, I love everyone." That means human beings are judging people. That is part of what we do, is we look at things and we make judgments, either positive or negatively, and we all have our groups. And so I'm going to give you guys some prompts and go through an exercise where we are going to actually be able to look at our own favorite devalued people. So the groups of people that we devalue, either consciously or perhaps unconsciously, and be able to kind of think about that. And that'll be the first thing that we'll do the next time we get together, is talk about that. So
this is personally, right, Marnie? Like, it's different than what we started today with, thinking
right.
about society in general. This is personal. You don't have to show anyone your list. Like, we do hope you'll come back with some insight, some discussion to share about the experience. But we're not passing around lists of our favorite devalued people. It's the exercise to help you raise your consciousness. And every time I do this, like when we go through SRV or we're teaching it, if Marnie's up at the front of the room and she's like reading the prompts and I'm writing them down, like it's interesting to see my list change over time, and probably to grow. So I hope you.
Somehow my list doesn't get any shorter.
I know.
I don't know what happens. So.
Yes. So the link, I don't know, and maybe Elizabeth, so there's a question. Elizabeth, could you email this link that I just put in the chat box? It takes you directly to this Google Drive. And if anybody wants to try it right now and just click on that link and just make sure it takes you to this Google Drive, and that it's accessible and not, blocked only to people I have in my contacts. It takes you there, and then you'll click on that and listen to Marnie's voice. So you'll just need some sheets of blank paper and a writing utensil.
Awesome. Yes, we can email that to folks who are here this evening, and I did test it. I got into the link. Thank you.
Okay, great. And also in the Google Drive, this image doesn't show it. I put some of the slides from tonight in there as a handout if people want to refer back to them, and it has some of the prompts at the very end that Marnie will go through in that handout. They kind of look like this. So if you want that, or if you just want to listen and write down. Both are available.
So I think now we could stop and kind of give people, do you want to do the poll now and then give people do questions? Is that how we want to do it? And then depending on how that goes, I can actually flip into the first wound too if we've got a little bit of time left. So you guys were such good hard workers. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's actually good.
Perfect. Sounds good. So yeah, we'll flip in a quick poll that we just do during each of our adult RE classes. So Margaret is going to launch our poll, and it's 3 quick questions that'll take all of 30 seconds. And if you'll just click on your screen there, and that will complete that part. And then perfect, so we get to ask questions of our presenters and dive into the next part. Great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for participating in that. And great. We're ready to move on to questions, thoughts, reflections, and what's next.
Come on, don't be shy, people. Nothing? All right.
Okay, am I live here now? Can I talk?
Yes, yes.
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 Okay, I put in prejudiced against people who won't get vaccinated just because I wanted to bring up something. That's one of my prejudices, but it's not a social prejudice. It's exactly the opposite for part of society. I think you have to think about who's doing the prejudicing and who's the prejudicee, or whoever, whatever the word is.
I mean, certainly. So, I mean, there's, there are some things that we would hold as societal values, and then that pretty much everybody in society holds. And then there are other things that really aren't. So, so I think that people who are unvaccinated actually become part of my favorite devalued people, right? I mean, that becomes, that becomes, and vice versa on the other side, people who feel very strongly that we shouldn't have vaccine mandates or mask mandates, they become as devalued as well. So Katie's actually just brought up a slide here.
It reminded me of it.
Yeah, no, this is a really important point, right? Because what we have is that we actually filter as human beings. We make judgments based on not only what we see actually with our eyes, but we base it on our physical environments. So when we walk in and we actually look at something, if the physical environment is uncomfortable, we are actually more likely to perceive that as being negative, right? If it's freezing cold, or it's awful colors, or it's really loud. So that becomes part of what we see, and that's part of what we judge, okay? Citizen advocacy really pays attention to this, actually. This is one of the things that they pay attention to, is that because they know that we make judgments based on physical environments. So oftentimes, if you are going to meet somebody who has a disability for the first time, in order to see if you guys are a good match, that's going to happen in a community setting that's as calm as possible. You're generally not going to get introduced in an institutional setting where it's off-putting to human beings. So your own characteristics and experiences also put in when you are the observer. Your own characteristics and experiences will put in whether you have a positive or a negative experience. So I've seen this happen in my own life on several occasions. So I'm now a pretty out lesbian woman. And I have actually had experiences where people have made judgments about other gay and lesbian people that they have met based on having met me, right? So that's an example where your characteristics and experiences will change, but that works on the negative side too, right? So then you also have your social environment, how you were raised, what your parents taught you, what churches you went to. All of the social environment will play into whether or not you make a positive or a negative judgment. And lastly, actually, is what you actually see. So I've actually had this experience happen to me when I went into a really bad day program, actually, one time in Nebraska, where the physical environment, even my characteristics and experiences, you know, I had positives, but the environment of it was so overwhelmingly negative. When I walked in, I saw adults sitting there who were drawing with children's coloring books, and all of this children's imagery came up into my head that when I actually sat down to speak to the people I already had in my head, they're not going to be able to communicate with me. And I was so shocked when I was like, oh my gosh, I should know better than this. So it's really powerful. What we actually see is sometimes not even really what we perceive, because all of those other filters are so strong. So that's a good point.
And I think like the observer, I mean, it changes. So like this observer is looking at people who are vaccinated. There's judgments to be made with all of this. And then the same is true with the reverse. So if someone's looking at unvaccinated folks, depending on what your characteristics are and your experiences and how you're showing up in your social environment. So I think that's an interesting point.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Well, I just wanted to comment that I found it very interesting looking at this from a societal standpoint, but also at an individual, applying this same concept to the individual. I think for many of us, as we age, you naturally move more towards some of these devalued aspects that high achieving people didn't have before. And in some ways, I think it makes aging even scarier for high achieving people with value systems that have really valued all those things that we listed so highly. And that when, you know, if you live long enough, some of those are going to start slipping out of your grasp. and I think it's, you know, it's a powerful source of fear for the individuals as well as in society.
And I would challenge you to think about that too, is that yes, I agree with you that it's a source of fear, but it also can be a very good source of identification.
Yes, and it can increase compassion, I think.
Right. And we actually teach, when we teach the big SRV, we teach a whole module on what we call interpersonal identification. And the biggest part of that is seeing the humanness in other people, and being able to look at yourself and say, oh, I remember when I felt like that, and use that to identify with other people is a really powerful tool. So as you know, we've been through devalued experiences and are moving, you know, as the older we get, possibly to more devalued status, using that as an identification point can be really powerful.
I guess I'm wondering, I'm really sort of intrigued by your use of the term devalued. I guess I've heard words like marginalized or disenfranchised used more often. And I'm wondering sort of what was behind the choice to use that term, and also maybe what impact you see it having on conversations using devalued over maybe more words with more negative connotations.
So devalued actually is a Wolf word. I will say that Dr. Wolfensberger is probably the most precise language person you could ever come around. So I'm going to guess at this. I'm going to tell you that. So how you get to devalued is the things that we value, and then the opposite of that. So I feel pretty certain that that's the reason why he chose to lift up that term, is because that it becomes a clearer image in your head of valued status, devalued status, as opposed to marginalized. Marginalized from what? You know, certainly people who are devalued are marginalized. I'm not arguing that point at all. I mean, that's, you know, part of the characteristic, but I think that it's a precision in the language. And how could it change the conversation? I mean, I think that that's actually a good conversation for the congregation to have too, about, you know, because it does require some explanation. Probably people are like, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by devalued? But that would be my guess. Katie, you have anything to add there?
Well, as you were talking, and like, what is your place in it too? Because I think it gets at the consciousness raising as well when you start thinking of things that are things, qualities, characteristics that are valued in society, and then the people who embody those are people who have valued status, and then the opposite then is the point of devaluation, and then how our own interaction is with the people in both groups. And I mean, for our purposes would be really to reflect and think about how we are, you know, interacting with folks who live in devalued status. So in the 4-day SRV, there's a lot of wolf words, a lot of terminology that, you know, make you ponder more.
Any other questions?
We appreciate your questions and your
Yeah,
comments.
no, we love to have questions and comments.
And the chat box that was lively tonight, so thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
As
All
it
right.
seems, there isn't a lot going on right now. This is out of my personal experience. I'm always one of those people that say, like, tomorrow morning, I'd be like, I wish I asked this question. So I'm going to offer, if you have a question that pops up between now and next week, you do not have to wait till next week to ask the question. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat box. And then also, Elizabeth, if you could put that in the email with the link as well. If you have any question or want to discuss or talk about language or anything you heard tonight more in between our sessions, I'm happy to have a conversation at any point in time. We can do that over Zoom, over the phone, email, or we can even grab coffee outside where it's safe and nice while we have wonderful, beautiful weather. So if anything pops in your head, feel free to reach out to me. I would absolutely love to hear. And if I don't have the perfect answer, we will all get together and we'll make sure we get it covered by next week as well. So just wanted to offer that for you.
Absolutely. I mean, and I, Elizabeth, as you can pass on my contact information too, if anybody has anything, I have no problem catching up with you.
Great, will do.
All right. I think we're a couple minutes away from 9 o'clock. So since we gave you guys homework, you can go ahead and get started on it.
Extended study. Because the homework might have a negative connotation, you know, like people might dread it.
I actually think you guys will enjoy the exercise. So
I do too.
I hope you will. All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
See you next week.
Take care.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. I will extinguish our chalice and we'll look forward to next week. Claire will be introducing next week's class and I will be watching the recording and then get to see you in 2 weeks. But so excited for our 3-part series and we will see you back next week.
Take care.
All right. Thanks, everybody.